The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I sat in the back row, watching my siblings whisper and smirk near the front. They thought I couldn't hear them, but their words cut through the silence like knives. "Poor Janet," my sister Carol muttered to our brother Mike. "Grandma Rose probably left her the recipe collection or something useless like that." Mike chuckled softly. "If she left her anything at all. You know how Grandma felt about Janet's choices." I pressed my lips together, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. At 68, I should have been used to being the family disappointment by now, the one who never married well, never had the perfect house, never lived up to their expectations. But hearing it still stung. The judge shuffled his papers at the front of the room. "We're here today for the reading of Rose Margaret Thompson's last will and testament." My grandmother's full name echoed in the sterile room, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, sitting in her kitchen while she taught me to make her famous apple pie. She'd always called me her little helper, even when everyone else called me the troublemaker. I'm Janet, by the way. I'm 68 years old, worked as a school secretary for 43 years, and lived in the same modest apartment since my divorce 20 years ago. While my siblings built their McMansions and joined country clubs, I chose a simpler life. They never understood that choice. But before I continue telling you what happened in that courtroom, tell me in the comments below, have you ever felt like the black sheep of your family? I'd love to hear your story. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Carol and Mike leaned forward expectantly. My nephew David, Carol's eldest, was practically vibrating with anticipation. He'd been talking about Grandma's lake house for months, planning renovations before she was even gone. "Let's begin with the smaller bequests," the lawyer announced. Carol received Grandma's china set, the one we'd eaten Sunday dinners on for decades. Mike got the antique grandfather clock that had chimed in Grandma's hallway since before I was born. Various cousins received jewelry, furniture, and family photographs. With each name called, my siblings grew more confident, more smug. Carol even turned around once to give me a pitying look, as if she felt sorry for me sitting there empty-handed. The judge continued reading, his voice steady and professional. "To my grandson, David Thompson, I leave my 1967 Chevelle fully restored, with the hope that he'll take better care of it than he did his promises to visit me." David's face went white. That wasn't the lake house he'd been expecting. The car was nice, sure, but it wasn't the property goldmine he'd been counting on. "Now," the judge said, adjusting his glasses, "we come to the major assets of the estate." The room went dead silent. This was it, the moment my family had been waiting for. The moment that would prove, once and for all, exactly where I stood in Grandma Rose's heart. Carol gripped Mike's arm. David sat forward so far he was practically falling out of his chair. And me? I just sat there, preparing myself for the final confirmation that I was, and always had been, the forgotten granddaughter. The judge looked down at the papers, and what he said next changed everything. But let me back up and tell you how we got to this moment, because the real story started 3 months earlier when Grandma Rose was still alive. It was a Tuesday morning when my phone rang. I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen, the same routine I'd had for 20 years. Carol's voice came through sharp and demanding, the way it always did when she wanted something. "Janet, we need to talk about Grandma." "What about her?" I asked, though I already knew. Grandma had been getting weaker, more confused. The doctor said it was just a matter of time. Mike and I think it's time she moved to assisted living. That house is too big for her, and she's becoming a danger to herself. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "Have you talked to Grandma about this?" Carol's laugh was cold. "She's not thinking clearly anymore, Janet. Someone has to make the hard decisions, someone responsible." There it was, that word they'd been throwing at me my whole life, responsible, code for not you, Janet. "I visit her every week," I said quietly. "She seems fine when I'm there. That's because you only see what you want to see." Mike and I have been discussing this with David, and we think Sunset Manor would be perfect for her. It's expensive, but once we sell the house and liquidate her assets... My stomach dropped. "You want to sell Grandma's house? It's a prime piece of real estate, Janet. The lakefront alone is worth a fortune. We can't let it just sit there while she deteriorates." I thought about that house. The wraparound porch where Grandma and I used to shell peas together, the kitchen where she taught me to cook, the attic where we'd spent rainy afternoons going through old photo albums. That house held every good memory I had of my childhood. What does Grandma say about all this? She gets upset when we bring it up, which just proves she's not capable of making these decisions anymore. Look, Janet, I know you have some sentimental attachment to that place, but sentiment doesn't pay for quality care. After I hung up, I drove straight to Grandma's house. I found her in her garden, pruning her rose bushes with steady hands. Her mind seemed clear as crystal that day. "They want to put me away," she said, without looking up when she heard my car door slam. "Grandma, I know what they're planning, sweetheart. Carol called here yesterday, talking about my best interests and making smart financial decisions." She finally looked at me, her blue eyes still sharp despite her 89 years. "You know what she really wants, don't you?" I nodded. We both knew. "That house has been in our family for 63 years, Grandma continued, deadheading a particularly stubborn rose. "Your grandfather built that dock with his own hands. I painted every room, planted every flower. But to them, it's just dollar signs." "Maybe they're right, though," I said carefully. "Maybe it is too much house for you to handle alone." Grandma straightened up, and for a moment I saw the fierce woman who'd raised 4 children and buried a husband and never asked anyone for help. "Janet Marie, I've been making my own decisions since before your siblings were even born. I'm not about to stop now just because they think I'm inconvenient." That afternoon, she made us both tea, and we sat on the porch swing, watching the lake. She told me stories I'd never heard before, about how she and Grandpa had scrimped and saved to buy the land, how they'd lived in a tiny trailer for 2 years while building the house, how she'd worked nights at the diner to help pay the mortgage. "This place isn't just a house, Janet. It's a legacy. It's proof that 2 people can build something beautiful together, something that lasts." 3 weeks later, Grandma had a stroke. Small, the doctors said, but enough to scare my siblings into action. Carol and Mike swooped in like vultures, talking about power of attorney and what's best for everyone involved. But here's what they didn't know. During those 3 weeks between our porch conversation and her stroke, Grandma Rose had been busy, very busy. And now, sitting in that courthouse, listening to the judge read her will, I was about to discover exactly what she'd been up to. The weeks after Grandma's stroke were a battlefield, and I was caught right in the middle of it. Carol had appointed herself the family general, marching into Grandma's hospital room with folders full of paperwork and an attitude that could cut glass. Mike followed behind her like a faithful lieutenant, nodding at everything she said. "We've found the perfect place," Carol announced to Grandma, who was still weak but alert. "Sunset Manor has an opening, and they can take you next week." Grandma's grip on my hand tightened. "I don't want to go to any manor, Carol. I want to go home." "Mother, be reasonable. You can't live alone anymore. What if you fall again? What if something worse happens?" "Then something worse happens," Grandma said, with the stubborn streak I'd inherited from her. "It's my life, Carol. My choice." David was there too, practically salivating over real estate listings he'd printed out. "Grandma, look at these comparable sales in your area. Your property could easily fetch $800,000, maybe more with the right renovations." I watched Grandma's face harden. "You're already spending my money, are you?" "It's not like that," Mike jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "We just want to make sure you have the best care possible." "The best care would be letting me stay in my own home." "With what help?" Carol snapped. "Janet can barely take care of herself, let alone you. She lives in that tiny apartment, works part-time at the school district, drives a car that's older than some of her students. How exactly is she going to provide the level of care you need?" The words hit me like physical blows. Everything she said was true. I wasn't wealthy. I didn't have the resources they did. But I had something they didn't, time, and the willingness to spend it with Grandma. "I could move in with her," I said quietly. The room went silent. Carol stared at me like I'd suggested we all join the circus. "Janet, that's sweet but completely impractical. What about your job, your apartment, your life?" "My life isn't going anywhere. Jobs can be replaced. Grandma can't." David laughed. Actually laughed. "Aunt Janet, no offense, but you're not exactly nurse material. Grandma needs professional care, not good intentions." That night, after everyone else had gone home to their comfortable lives, I stayed with Grandma. The hospital was quiet except for the beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses in the hallway. "They think I'm helpless," I whispered to her in the darkness. They think we both are, she whispered back. Always have. Maybe they're right. Maybe I can't take care of you the way they could afford to. Grandma turned her head to look at me, and even in the dim light from the hallway, her eyes were fierce. Janet, do you remember what I told you when you got divorced? I did remember. I'd been so ashamed, so convinced I'd failed at the one thing women of my generation were supposed to succeed at: marriage. Grandma had held me while I cried and said something I'd never forgotten. You said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when everyone thinks you're wrong. That's right. And you did choose yourself. You chose a life that made sense to you, not to them. You chose independence over security, authenticity over approval. She reached for my hand with fingers that still wore the simple gold wedding band she'd never taken off, not even after Grandpa died. Now I'm asking you to be brave one more time. Not for me, for yourself. Don't let them convince you that love isn't enough, that caring isn't valuable just because it doesn't come with a price tag. The next morning, Carol cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. She slid a stack of papers across the table between our coffee cups. I've had lawyers draw up power of attorney papers. Mike and I will handle Grandma's finances and medical decisions. It's better this way, cleaner, more organized. I stared at the papers without touching them. What about what Grandma wants? Grandma's not thinking clearly right now. The stroke affected her judgment. Her judgment seems fine to me. Carol's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she'd perfected in childhood. Janet, don't make this harder than it has to be. We all know you care about her, but caring isn't the same as being capable. Step aside and let the adults handle this. I looked up at my sister, successful, wealthy, confident Carol, and realized that this moment had been building our entire lives. Every family dinner where I sat quietly while they discussed their achievements. Every holiday where they exchanged expensive gifts while I brought homemade cookies. Every conversation where they made decisions about our family without consulting me. This time was going to be different. No, I said simply. Carol blinked. What? I said no. I won't sign those papers and I won't step aside. Grandma doesn't want to go to assisted living, and I'm going to make sure she doesn't have to. The war had officially begun. What followed was 3 weeks of psychological warfare disguised as family concern. Carol started calling me every day, sometimes twice a day, with new arguments about why I was being selfish and unrealistic. Mike would show up at my apartment unannounced, wanting to talk sense into me over coffee that grew cold while he lectured me about financial responsibility. Janet, you're living in a fantasy, he said during one particularly brutal visit. Do you have any idea what home care costs? What if she needs physical therapy? What about medications? Emergency medical equipment? I sat at my little kitchen table, feeling smaller with every word he spoke. My savings account had maybe $3,000 in it. My pension from the school district barely covered my own expenses. I've done the math, Mike continued, pulling out his phone to show me spreadsheets he'd created. Quality in-home care runs about $6,000 a month minimum. Physical therapy, another $1,500. Modifications to the house for safety, ramps, grab bars, emergency alert systems, that's another $10,000 up front. The numbers swam in front of my eyes. He was right, and we both knew it. I couldn't afford to take care of Grandma the way she deserved. But if we sell the house, Mike pressed on, we can afford the best care money can buy. Sunset Manor has a memory care unit, 24-hour nursing staff, social activities, proper nutrition programs. She doesn't have memory problems, I said weakly. Yet, Janet, she's 89 years old. These things progress. Wouldn't you rather have her somewhere that can handle whatever comes next? After he left, I sat in my apartment and cried. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who was drowning. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish, holding on to Grandma for my own emotional needs rather than thinking about what was truly best for her. But the real pressure came from David. My nephew had always been the golden child, successful lawyer, beautiful wife, 2 perfect kids. He'd learned early how to get what he wanted by making other people feel guilty for standing in his way. Aunt Janet, he said when he cornered me outside Grandma's hospital room, I think you and I need to have an honest conversation. His tone was gentle, concerned, the way you'd talk to a child who was about to touch a hot stove. I know you love Grandma. We all do. But love sometimes means making hard choices. This isn't a hard choice for me, David. Isn't it? He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of house listings. This is what lakefront properties in Grandma's area are selling for. 800,000, 900,000, some over $1 million. The numbers were staggering. I'd never seen that much money in one place in my entire life. Now imagine, David continued, what kind of care that money could buy. Not just for the next year or two, but for the rest of her life. Professional nursing care, the best doctors, activities and social programs to keep her mind sharp. He swiped to another photo. Sunset Manor's website, full of smiling elderly people playing cards and painting watercolors. Or, he said, letting the word hang in the air, we can watch you struggle to take care of her in a house that's falling apart, with resources you don't have, until something terrible happens and we all have to live with the guilt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what David had said, about the guilt we'd all have to live with. But whose guilt was he really talking about? Mine, for not being able to provide the care Grandma needed? Or theirs, for prioritizing money over her wishes? The breaking point came when Carol showed up at the hospital with a social worker. "This is Mrs. Henderson," Carol announced as they walked into Grandma's room where I was reading her the morning paper. "She's here to do a home assessment for Grandma's discharge planning." Mrs. Henderson was a kind-faced woman in her 50s, but she carried a clipboard and had that professional look of someone who'd seen it all. "Mrs. Thompson," she said to Grandma, "your family is concerned about your safety at home. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your daily routine." For the next hour, I watched this stranger dissect Grandma's life with clinical precision. How many times had she fallen recently? Did she remember to take her medications? Could she prepare safe meals for herself? Did she have adequate transportation to medical appointments? With each question, Grandma seemed to shrink a little smaller in her hospital bed. When it was over, Mrs. Henderson stepped into the hallway with Carol and Mike. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Significant safety concerns. Inadequate support system. Cognitive decline indicators. Recommend supervised care environment. Carol came back in wearing the expression of someone who just won a difficult argument. "Well, Grandma," she said with false brightness, "Mrs. Henderson agrees that Sunset Manor would be the safest option for you." I looked at Grandma, sitting there in her hospital gown, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, I thought she was going to give up, let them make all the decisions, surrender to their version of what was best. Then she looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. The same stubborn fire that had gotten her through 63 years in that house, through raising 4 children and burying a husband and surviving everything life had thrown at her. "I want to speak to Janet," she said quietly. "Alone." After Carol and Mike reluctantly left the room, Grandma waited until their footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she turned to me with an intensity that made me lean closer to her bed. "Janet, I need you to go to my house and get something for me." "Of course, Grandma. What do you need?" "In my bedroom closet, behind the old hat box on the top shelf, there's a manila envelope. Bring it to me tonight and don't tell anyone else about it." The urgency in her voice sent a chill down my spine. "Grandma, what's in the envelope?" "Insurance," she said cryptically. "Just promise me you'll get it." That evening, I used my key to let myself into Grandma's house. The place felt hollow without her presence, too quiet, too still. Carol and Mike had already started going through things, I noticed. There were boxes in the living room labeled "Donate" and "Keep," and someone had put sticky notes on various pieces of furniture. I found the envelope exactly where Grandma said it would be, tucked behind a dusty hat box that probably hadn't been moved in 20 years. It was thick, sealed, and had my name written on it in Grandma's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were legal documents, lots of them. The first thing I saw was a new will, dated just 2 weeks before Grandma's stroke. But that wasn't what made me gasp and sink onto her bedroom floor. It was the deed to the house. Not a copy of the deed. The actual deed, with Grandma's signature and an official notary stamp. And my name. My name was on the deed as joint owner with rights of survivorship. There was a letter attached, written in Grandma's shaky but determined handwriting. My dearest Janet, if you're reading this, then Carol and Mike are probably trying to put me in a home and sell our house. I've seen this coming for months, the way they look at this place like it's already theirs, the way they talk about liquidating assets and maximizing my care options. What they don't know is that 3 months ago, I went to see my lawyer, Harold Brennan. Remember him? He's the son of the man who handled your grandfather's affairs. Good family, honest people. I told Harold that I wanted to make sure this house stayed in the family the right way, with someone who loves it, not someone who sees it as a paycheck. So I added your name to the deed. Legally, this house is half yours now, and when I'm gone, it will be entirely yours. I also opened a joint bank account with you as co-owner. There's enough money in it to cover property taxes and basic maintenance for years. Your siblings don't know about this account. It's at First National, the little branch downtown where your grandfather and I always banked. Janet, I'm not doing this because I don't love Carol and Mike. I'm doing it because I know who you are. You're the one who visits every week without being asked. You're the one who remembers my stories and listens to my worries. You're the one who sees this house the way I do. Not as real estate, but as home. I need you to be strong now, sweetheart. They're going to be angry when they find out. But this is my decision, made with a clear mind and a full heart. The envelope also contains documentation of some other things I've done. Power of attorney papers naming you as my primary decision maker if I become incapacitated. A living will specifying that I want to stay home as long as possible. And a few other surprises that might come in handy. Don't let them bully you anymore, Janet. You have more power than you think. All my love. Grandma Rose P.S. Check the safety deposit box. The key is taped under the drawer in my bedside table. I sat on that bedroom floor for a long time, reading and rereading the letter. My mind was spinning. Joint ownership, power of attorney, a secret bank account. How had Grandma managed all of this without anyone knowing? The safety deposit box key was exactly where she said it would be. I held it in my palm, this tiny piece of metal that apparently held even more surprises. But the biggest shock came when I looked at the dates on all the documents. Grandma hadn't done any of this impulsively or in a moment of confused thinking. She'd been planning this for months, carefully and deliberately, while Carol and Mike thought they were managing her affairs. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Talk to the discharge planner. Grandma can move to Sunset Manor Thursday if we finish the paperwork tomorrow. Can you meet us at the hospital at 10 a.m. to sign everything? I stared at the text, then at the power of attorney document in my hands that made me, not Carol, not Mike, Grandma's legal decision maker. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with all of Grandma's documents spread out like battle plans, trying to process what I'd discovered. The safety deposit box key had revealed even more surprises. Stock certificates worth nearly $200,000. Savings bonds that had been quietly accumulating interest for decades. And a second letter, this one with specific instructions about what to do when the vultures start circling. Grandma Rose had been planning this chess match for months, and she'd just made me her queen. But I knew that revealing everything at once would be a mistake. Carol and Mike would lawyer up, challenge everything, tie us up in court for years while Grandma sat in limbo. I needed to be smarter than that. At 7 a.m., I called Harold Brennan, Grandma's lawyer. His voice was warm and familiar. I remembered him from when he was just a kid helping his father with legal documents at our kitchen table 30 years ago. Janet, I've been waiting for your call. How is Rose doing? She's recovering. But Harold, my siblings are trying to put her in assisted living against her wishes. They don't know about the changes she made to her documents. Ah, he said knowingly. The family meeting your grandmother predicted would happen. She's a remarkable woman, Janet. Sharp as a tack right up until she signed those papers. Not a single sign of diminished capacity. What exactly did she tell you? Harold's chuckle was dry. She said, and I quote, "Harold, my other children see dollar signs when they look at me now, but Janet sees me." She was very specific about how she wanted this handled. We talked for an hour, Harold explaining my legal rights and the strength of Grandma's documents. Everything was airtight, properly notarized, and filed with the county. Carol and Mike could contest it if they wanted, but they'd lose. Your grandmother also asked me to prepare a few additional documents, Harold said, just in case you needed some extra ammunition. Are you ready to collect them? At 9:45 a.m., I walked into Grandma's hospital room carrying Harold Brennan's business card and a single folder. Carol and Mike were already there with their discharge papers and Sunset Manor brochures, looking confident and organized. Good, you're here, Carol said briskly. We just need your signature on a few forms and we can get this process started. She slid a stack of papers across the rolling table toward me. Transfer of care authorization, financial responsibility agreements, and at the bottom, the power of attorney documents that would make her and Mike Grandma's legal guardians. I'm not signing anything, I said quietly. The room went silent except for the rhythmic beeping of Grandma's monitors. What do you mean? Mike asked, confused. I mean, I'm not signing those papers. Grandma doesn't want to go to assisted living. Carol's face flushed red. Janet, we've been through this. You can't provide the level of care she needs. Actually, I said, opening my folder, I can. I pulled out the first document, my power of attorney, properly notarized and legally binding. Grandma Rose made me her primary decision-maker 3 months ago. Any medical or care decisions go through me now. Carol snatched the paper from my hands, her eyes scanning it frantically. This can't be legal. She wasn't thinking clearly. We can contest this. You can try, I said calmly. But Harold Brennan conducted a thorough competency evaluation before she signed. There are witnesses, medical assessments, and video recordings of the entire process. Mike was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Janet, what the hell is going on? What's going on is that you've spent weeks making decisions about Grandma's life without asking what she actually wants. Well, now you know. David, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Okay, fine. Maybe Grandma did give you medical power of attorney. But what about the financial reality? How are you going to pay for home care? Where are you going to live? That house needs thousands of dollars in modifications just to be safe for her. I smiled, actually smiled, and pulled out the second document. I'm not worried about money, David, and I won't need to find somewhere to live. I handed him the deed showing my joint ownership of the house. I'll be living at home. Our home. The color drained from his face as he read the document. This is impossible. Grandma would never... She wouldn't cut us out like this. She didn't cut you out of anything that was ever really yours, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. This house was never your inheritance to count on. Carol was pacing now, her carefully controlled facade cracking. You manipulated her. You took advantage of a sick, elderly woman. I visited her every week for 20 years, Carol. I listened to her stories, remembered her friends' names, helped her with her garden. If that's manipulation, then you might want to look up the definition. Grandma had been quiet through all of this, but now she spoke, her voice weak but clear. Carol, Mike, sit down, please. They reluctantly took the chairs beside her bed, looking like scolded children. I made these decisions with a clear mind and a full heart, Grandma said. Janet is the only one of my children who ever saw this house as a home instead of an asset. She's earned the right to make decisions about my care. But Mom, Mike said desperately, what about fairness? What about the rest of us? Grandma's eyes grew sad but determined. Fairness isn't always about equal distribution, Michael. Sometimes it's about recognizing who has actually been there when it mattered. I looked at my siblings' shocked faces and realized this was just the beginning. They weren't going to accept this quietly, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their disapproval. I had something more powerful than their anger now. I had the law on my side, money in the bank, and most importantly, I had Grandma's trust. The real battle was about to begin. The explosion I was expecting came 3 days later, but not in the way I'd anticipated. I was at Grandma's house, our house, installing grab bars in the bathroom when Carol's car screeched into the driveway. She stormed through the front door without knocking, followed by Mike and David, all of them carrying folders and wearing expressions that could melt steel. "We know what you did," Carol announced, waving a stack of papers in the air. I set down my drill and faced them calmly. "What exactly do you think I did?" "We hired our own lawyer," Mike said. "Had him investigate all of Grandma's recent financial transactions. 3 months ago, she liquidated her retirement account. $47,000, Janet. Money that was supposed to be part of our inheritance. David stepped forward, his lawyer training evident in his controlled tone. She also closed 2 savings accounts and a CD that had been earning interest for decades. Nearly $30,000 gone. Where did the money go, Janet? Carol's voice was ice cold. Because it sure as hell didn't go to her medical expenses. I looked at their angry faces and realized they thought they'd caught me red-handed in some elaborate embezzlement scheme. They thought I'd manipulated a vulnerable old woman into stealing their inheritance. The money, I said carefully, went where Grandma wanted it to go. To you, Carol shouted. She gave it all to you, didn't she? While we were worried about her health and safety, you were helping yourself to her life savings. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, partly because I could see how it looked from their perspective. A bitter, divorced woman with money problems suddenly inheriting a house and gaining control of an elderly relative's finances. It was exactly the kind of story that made headlines. Family caregiver accused of elder abuse. That's not what happened, I said quietly. Then explain it, David demanded. Where did that money go? I walked to the kitchen table and picked up a folder I'd been hoping I wouldn't need to use. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and a detailed accounting of every dollar Grandma had spent over the past 3 months. $15,000 went to Harold Brennan for legal fees, I said, laying out the documents. Not just for changing her will in the deed, but for setting up a special needs trust to protect her assets if she ever does need long-term care. Carol grabbed the receipts, scanning them frantically. $8,000 went to home modifications, I continued. The grab bars I'm installing today, a ramp for the back porch, an emergency alert system, a stair lift for the basement, all the safety improvements you said she needed. $12,000 went into an account specifically designated for her medical expenses. Physical therapy, medications, any equipment she might need. Harold has the documentation. Mike was looking confused now. What about the rest? The remaining $12,000 went to pay for professional home health aides. I've already interviewed and hired a certified nursing assistant who will come in 3 days a week, and a physical therapist who specializes in stroke recovery. I handed David the contracts and credentials for both professionals. They start next week. Grandma will have better medical supervision than most assisted living facilities provide, and she gets to stay in her own home. The room went quiet except for the rustling of papers as they examined the documents. I watched their expressions change from anger to confusion to something that might have been grudging respect. But, Carol said weakly, what about you? Where do you fit into all this? I fit into this by being her granddaughter who loves her more than her property values. That's not what I meant. You quit your job, gave up your apartment. What are you getting out of this arrangement? It was a fair question, and I'd been asking myself the same thing for weeks. What was I getting out of turning my entire life upside down to take care of an elderly woman when my siblings were offering a much easier path? I'm getting to keep my grandmother for as long as possible, I said simply. I'm getting to wake up every morning in the house where I learned to make pie crust and ride bicycles and believe in myself. I'm getting to be the person she always thought I was, instead of the disappointment you've all been telling me I am for the past 20 years. Carol sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. Janet, we didn't mean... Yes, you did, and that's okay. You've never understood my choices, and I've never understood yours. But this isn't about us anymore. It's about what Grandma wants, and she wants to come home. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. The house is still worth a fortune. When she passes away, I'll cross that bridge. Maybe I'll stay. Maybe I'll sell it and split the proceeds with the family. I haven't decided yet. But that's a conversation for another day. Mike was staring out the window at the lake, where Grandma's dock stretched into the late afternoon sunlight. She really planned all of this, didn't she? Every detail. She's smarter than any of us gave her credit for. She saw this conflict coming months before it happened, and she made sure the person who actually wanted to take care of her would have the resources to do it. Carol looked up at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Respect. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Give up everything to become a full-time caregiver. I'm not giving up everything, Carol. I'm gaining everything that actually matters. The next morning, I brought Grandma Rose home from the hospital. As I helped her up the ramp onto her back porch, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Well played, sweetheart. Well played." That brings me back to the courthouse, 6 months later, sitting in the back row while the judge read Grandma Rose's final will and testament. Those 6 months had been the hardest and most rewarding of my life. There were difficult days when Grandma's strength failed her, when the physical therapy was painful, when I questioned whether I was really equipped for this enormous responsibility. But there were also mornings when we sat on the porch swing watching the sunrise over the lake, afternoons when she taught me family recipes I'd never bothered to learn, and evenings when she shared stories about my grandfather that made her eyes light up like she was 20 years old again. My siblings had eventually made their peace with the situation. Carol still visited twice a month, bringing flowers and updates about her own grandchildren. Mike had helped me repair the dock and never once mentioned its property value. David had even referred an excellent elder care attorney when we needed to update some of Grandma's insurance policies. But now, sitting in that sterile courtroom, I was facing the possibility that all our work, all our plans, had been for nothing. Maybe Grandma had changed her mind again. Maybe she'd decided that fairness really did mean equal distribution. Maybe I was about to discover that the house I'd been calling home for 6 months was never really mine at all. The judge cleared his throat and continued reading. To my daughter Carol, I leave my collection of china and crystal, along with my jewelry box and all its contents, knowing she will treasure these things as I have. To my son Michael, I leave my husband's tools and fishing equipment, along with the grandfather clock that has kept time in our family for 3 generations. To my grandson David, I leave my collection of first edition books and the antique writing desk where I composed letters to your grandfather during the war. Each bequest was thoughtful, personal, meaningful. Not the valuable items David had been expecting, but pieces of family history that connected them to their roots. To my remaining grandchildren, I leave equal shares of my investment portfolio with the hope that they will use this foundation to build their own legacies. The judge paused and looked directly at me. My heart stopped. And finally, to my granddaughter, Janet Marie, who gave up her own comfort to ensure mine, who chose love over convenience and presence over presence, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my home at 847 Lakeshore Drive, all property and buildings thereon, the contents of Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank, and any remaining financial assets not otherwise designated. The words echoed in the silent courtroom, but the judge wasn't finished. Janet, he continued, reading from Grandma's own words, this house has been your home in every way that matters for the past months. Now it's your home legally and permanently. But more than that, you've given me the gift of dignity, of choice, of dying in the place I loved most. No amount of money could ever repay that kindness. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of completion, of a promise kept, of a love acknowledged and returned. Carol reached over and squeezed my shoulder. She was right about you, she whispered. She always saw something in you that we missed. After the courthouse, we all went back to the house, my house now, and sat on the porch where Grandma and I had spent so many afternoons. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have made Grandma smile. You know what's funny? Mike said, nursing a beer and watching the water. I spent months angry about this house, about the money, about feeling left out. But sitting here now, I realize I never actually wanted to live here. I just wanted to know I could. It's not about the house, I said quietly. It never was. It's about being seen, being valued, being remembered. Carol nodded. She didn't leave you the house because you needed the money, Janet. She left it to you because you're the only one who would never sell it. They were right. This house, with its creaky floors and ancient plumbing and memories embedded in every board, would never go on the market. It would remain what Grandma always intended it to be. A home, not an investment. As my family packed up to return to their own lives, I sat alone on the porch swing, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the dock Grandpa had built with his own hands. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the lake, and I could almost hear Grandma's voice on the evening breeze, saying what she always said when I doubted myself. You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. You always have been. She was right. And finally, I believed it too. Like this video, subscribe and comment if you or someone you know has faced something similar. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that someone saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself.